without further ado, I'd like to dive in. So I will hand it over to Minerva Partners. And please take your time to introduce yourself before start. Okay.
Yeah. Who is the largest institutional consumer of oil in the world?
Who is the largest landowner in most countries?
Who is the only institution exempt from chemical dumping restrictions? In most countries, the answer to all of these questions is the military. Today's presentation, as you all know, will deal with the effects of the military on the environment, with a focus on military exercises in Northeast Asia. My name is Faye Crawford. I come from South Africa. I'm a sophomore student at Minerva University. I major in economics and my interest is in global development. So the idea of the intersection between peace and sustainability is really right in the middle of what I'm interested in. And I really learned so much during this project. And I was really happy to have worked with PEACEMOMO.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Elizabeth. I'm also a sophomore at Minerva University. I'm majoring in business and sustainability, and I've always had a fascination with sustainable food systems. So I've been thinking very deeply about humans' impact on the environment, but I never thought about the military's impact on the environment. So I found this project a fascinating extension of my interest in sustainability, and I've learned so much along the way, and I'm really excited to share my findings with you.
Yeah, and I'm Juliana Walter, but you can call me Jules. Most people call me Jules. I'm originally from Germany, and I'm interested in international relations, and the environment and military conflict are both topics that we need to cooperate on internationally. So that's what initially drew me to this project. And yeah, I think we're gonna dive right in with our findings.
So as we all know, 1945 was a turning point for the human rights paradigm. After the horrors of World War II and of the Nazi regime, the world's leaders, especially the Allied powers, came together and realized something in the way we approached the military and the way we approached war needed to change. This led to the Human Rights Charter, to the United Nations, and to an era of unprecedented global governance. Militaries weren't exempt from this wave. Before, it might have been unthinkable that institutions who are literally built to kill could ever be held to any kind of moral standards. But since that era, we've built, the most of the world, that is, has built a shared understanding of what constitutes fair game, of what constitutes human rights, and that extends to our war zones. We disapprove of harm to civilians in war, for example. We argue about the ethics of drone warfare on these grounds. We hunt down human rights offenders during war times through mechanisms like the International Criminal Court. Of course, the system is by no means perfect. War is and will forever remain a tragedy of our current world order, and we never want to let that escape our notice during this presentation. But the way that our understanding of human rights in war has evolved in the last several decades shows us something really important about our militaries and how we govern them. Basically, it shows us that we can govern them, that that's possible. We want to propose to you that today we're at another crossroads, and this time we're fighting for the rights of the natural world, and by extension, for our own survival. We want this century to be the turning point for environmentalism in the military. We want all institutions, but particularly our armies, to be held accountable to this new paradigm.
Yeah, so let's have a look at what impact the military has on the climate. If the US military were a country, it would be the 47th largest emitter in the world. The impact of the militaries on the climate is immense. And that's not the only issue. The 2015 Paris Agreement, the same agreement that set the 1.5 degrees goal for global warming, excluded militaries from emissions reporting, as well as from emissions reduction targets. We thus have a military emissions gap. The emissions of militaries that we know about are way smaller than the actual share of emissions. And that's a huge issue, because if we don't have this aggregated data of what causes the most emissions within the military, we won't be able to make data-driven decisions to reduce emissions. That's not to say we don't have any data. So let's look at some that I that I gathered from a study on the military emissions of the Korean military. I think it was 2021. The largest share of military emissions from the Korean military came from aircraft fuels. On the second place was emissions from electricity. Third place goes to building heating, and fourth place, and that's not included here, is vessels operation. And well, the fact or like the reason for why I don't have a fancy like graph or visualization with concrete percentages here is because that data is not published. We simply don't have this aggregated data, and that's why I had to include like those ominous black clouds that only show the hierarchy but not really what's going on. Actually, I think the Korean by the military emissions gap, that's an NGO that's really looking at that military emissions gap, the emissions of the Korean military, or the data accessibility is rated as very poor. Looking more at how we can actually measure military emissions, they are basically measured in 3 scopes. Scope 1 includes direct emissions from energy sources owned or controlled by an organization. For example, fuel used by aircraft, tanks, other vehicles in military context. The second scope includes indirect emissions associated with energy purchased by the military. And the third scope includes emissions resulting from upstream and downstream assets, not owned or controlled by the reporting organization, the military. That might, for example, include military equipment procurement, upstream or downstream, the environmental impact of conflicts. And the United Framework, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, like emissions reporting framework, doesn't cover all of those 3 scopes, but only mobile and stationary fuel use. So that only covers scope 1. So you see that like the problem is not only in what militaries are required to report, but also in the frameworks they're given to report. So here's what we suggest. Number 1, we suggest a comprehensive reporting framework for all militaries that covers all of the 3 scopes that I just outlined. There's hope, although not required to. Some military entities like the NATO or also the German military are already reporting their emissions in a more detailed manner, although their reports can certainly be described as greenwashing in some regards. We also we suggest mandatory emissions reduction targets for all militaries, and that's is also already done by Germany. I think the German Defense Ministry aims to reach net zero by 2045, and NATO aims to reach net zero by 2050. And as a third suggestion, and those are only the 3 main ones, there are obviously many more things that could be done, are transitioning to sustainable technologies, for example, e-fuels or renewables within the military. And as last point, I included this poster. It reads, recognize military and conflict emissions in the global stocktake. And the global stocktake is the process that was called for in the 2015 Paris Agreement, in which each party, so each state, nation, assesses the progress that it has made towards its emission reduction and adaptation goals. And the first global stocktake is actually happening right now, like at COP28. And yeah, this call was made by several civil society organizations, for example, including the Conflict and Environment Observatory. And I included this here just to emphasize also the importance of civil society organizations like PEACEMOMO in bringing about this societal paradigm change. Yeah, so that's on the military, and I'm going to hand it over to Ali. Yes, I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you so much, Jules. So as Jules nicely explained, the military has an enormous impact on the climate when it comes to direct CO2 emissions. But I think, as we're all aware of in this call, there's something that's even more important than CO2, or at least equally important, and that is biodiversity. The wealth that's contained within our ecosystems is something that we as humanity really ought to value and protect. And I think what my research has shown is that the military is not doing that at all. So first of all, as we alluded to at the beginning, a little known fact is that militaries number among the largest landowners in the world. So they occupy around 1 to 6% of the world's surface area. And for reference, that's approximately equal to the entirety of India. And I have double checked this fact multiple times because it is so mind-boggling. In many countries, such as South Korea, the whereabouts of military properties are a state secret. But in countries like Britain, where the data is publicly available, we know that the Department of Defense is the second largest landowner in the country, which is pretty extraordinary for a land-scarce country like England to be devoting so much land to defense. Yeah, beyond the sheer size of it, the land under military ownership is also remarkable for the biodiversity it contains. So militaries believe that they need to be trained to combat in very extreme environments. So typically the land they occupy includes mountains, wetlands, beaches, and reefs, ecosystems that we traditionally believe really ought to be protected because of the amazing species diversity contained within them. And I think what our research has shown is that the exceptional biodiversity that we know is contained within these lands is suffering immensely due to military training activities that are taking place. During my research, I tried to categorize the impacts of military training into pollution and physical damage. So first I'll walk you through pollution and then I'll go on to physical damage. With pollution, there were multiple types. There was chemical pollution, sound pollution, and light pollution. Unfortunately, when it comes to something like light and sound, the impacts are very diffuse. So it was very difficult to gather data. However, there is quite a bit of data on chemical pollution. So I'll just walk you through that now with some case studies. And then maybe later, if you're interested in sound or light pollution, you can ask me questions and I can point you to resources. So when it comes to chemical pollution, I think it's mind-boggling to understand that it starts with something as small as a bullet. So within normal bullets that you'll find in any gun, most of them contain lead, and that lead is used to add weight and explosive power. But as I'm sure you all know, lead is a heavy metal, which is a potent toxin for all animals, but birds especially. What I wasn't aware of before I started this research is that in the United States alone, 10 to 20 million birds die each year from lead toxicosis. So lead toxicosis is poisoning from lead, and most of that poisoning comes from used bullets that are in the environment. So this comes from the military. It also comes from hunters. We don't know exactly what the distribution is, but we can safely assume that the military is contributing a lot to that. So that's just in the States, 10 to 20 million birds dying each year. And that is the case in most countries around the world. Most militaries are still using lead bullets, even though alternatives have existed since the 90s. Moving on, when we go from bullets to bombs, the damage becomes even more extreme. Now we're going from pollution, chemical pollution, to physical damage. So the larger artillery that are used in live fire exercises, which in Korea are very common, introduces the risk of total ecosystem destruction. As the name hints, these live fire exercises are explosive and they can spark fires, forest fires that just completely obliterate miles of forest. Unfortunately for South Korea, we don't have the statistics because the government doesn't publish them. But we know, for example, that in Hawaii, since a military base has been set up there, the frequency and intensity of wildfires has increased enormously. There's also been similar cases in Australia of thousands of hectares of forest being burnt to a cinder because of military training exercises. Okay, so this is all rather sad news, unfortunately. And I think even sadder is the recognition that I've come to that militaries could choose to adopt practices that would be less harmful to the delicate ecosystems they train in. There are solutions. Like I hinted to before, there have been lead-free bullets on the market since the 90s. And there are some governments, such as the Swedish government, which have forced their militaries to move completely away from lead bullets and move to lead-free bullets, which contain metals like copper instead. And yes, they are slightly more expensive, but latest I saw, I think there was maybe a 15-cent difference per bullet in the cost. So it doesn't seem like such a major cost when it comes to the amount of birds that are killed. So yes, I think it's very important to stress that all the damage we're seeing to biodiversity that's caused by the military is due to a lack of willpower within the militaries rather than a lack of solutions. And with that, I'll pass on to Faye.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So I'm going to be discussing water, both ocean water and also fresh water. Jules, you can click ahead. Spoiler alert, I think you might have gathered the theme from my two teammates' presentations. Military exercises have an outsized impact on both oceans and freshwater quality. Let's first talk about oceans and let's discuss the Navy. Naval drills are a particularly big deal because they're one of the more visible ways that militaries have to show off power to potential enemies, particularly in Northeast Asia, which is a region really rife with tensions between North and South Korea, as well as between US allied powers like South Korea and Japan and China. You can click ahead a little, Jules. That's perfect. Thanks. Once more. Great. Military exercises aren't just there to train troops and test out strategies. They're performances of force. And so that makes them particularly frequent and particularly extreme in this region. So next slide. Did you know that as part of their joint naval exercises, South Korea, Japan, the US, and other allies sink old military ships for target practice? Sinking exercises, or SINKEX, cause dangerous levels of chemical runoff and heavy metal release into the surrounding oceans. SINKEX is a key component of the military exercises RIMPAC, which stands for the Rim of the Pacific exercises, which you may have heard of. They happen biannually on the coast of Hawaii. Korea has been participating in these exercises since 1990, and they're controversial for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons is that SINKEX is so damaging to the ocean biodiversity and also to the water quality of the oceans around which it happens. Some people argue that shipwrecks can have a positive impact on the environment, such as providing the opportunity for new reefs and allowing new aquatic life to settle. That's often the case for ships that are sunk intentionally and specifically to create these artificial reefs, but it's important to remember that those are very particularly placed, and also that those are typically geared not to have chemicals on board or heavy metals on board that are going to erode with time. So given that this ship sunk in military exercises, not to mention the ship sunk by war, I think more than half of the existing shipwrecks around the world are remnant from World War II, are very likely to be far worse for the environment than they are good for them, even if perhaps we get one or two artificial reefs in the process. The thing is, environmental groups in the US particularly have been challenging SINKEX exercises since as early as 2012. That's more than a decade of activism. Very little has come of it. And that's because military leaders have historically been able to bypass waste disposal regulations by simply claiming that giving naval troops target practice is an important part of their success in combat. And what that tells us, the dreary sort of takeaway from this, is that when nations continue to put military readiness so far above environmental well-being, that the militaries become totally unaccountable to the institutions that govern the rest of our society, it can be difficult to put a stop to the harms that we cause. Let's talk about now freshwater. Bomb testing sites, shooting ranges, and other inland military bases can cause huge chemical runoff into nearby water supplies, including drinking water for plants, animals, and humans alike. This has happened in the US with the controversial case of RDX, which is a chemical that's been allowed to drain into freshwater supplies and potentially caused cancer in people residing in nearby towns for decades. Once again, this is a case where civilian activism has been around for many years and hasn't come to much. This kind of damage has also happened right here in Korea. In fact, right here in Seoul, where we all sit, well, where the three of us anyway sit right now. So Jules, you can click ahead. And one more. Thank you. In the 2001 amendment to the Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA, which you may or may not have heard of, this was an agreement signed by the US and Korea in 1966. The US promised to, quote, promptly undertake to remedy contamination caused by the United States forces in Korea that poses a known, imminent, and substantial endangerment to human health. That basically means the US said they ought to be accountable to clean up their own mess in historic US bases in South Korea, in the case that things like chemical runoff cause a danger to human health. Despite that, the US military hasn't paid for the environmental cleanup of a single vacated military base, to my knowledge, and to the knowledge of everything that I read, and they've remained reckless all the way up to the end of their stay on many environmentally important sites in Korea. How is that possible? How is this lack of accountability continuing? Largely, the US military has just proved skilled at navigating around the various loopholes of the SOFA agreement that I mentioned earlier to ensure that Korea's environment doesn't become their problem. As a result, it's largely become South Korea's problem. Between 2000 and 2011, the Seoul government funded the cleanup of 2,000 tons of oil-contaminated underground water around US military bases alone. They found chemicals like benzene, toluene, and xylene, which I won't give you the long spiel on what all of those do and what they all mean. I'm not a chemist, so I don't really know myself. But these have been discovered in higher than safe concentrations in soil around particularly the Yongsan base. They're known to cause cancer in humans, not to mention what they do to our ecosystems. Similarly, they've discovered volatile organic compounds, including several that I can't pronounce, as well as heavy metals and pesticides in concentrations that are more than 900 times higher than the safe concentration for drinking water in other parts of Korea. Jules, you can go to the next slide. So many of these harmful practices from militaries around the world, not only on their homelands, but also on foreign lands, have been allowed to continue because, as I've emphasized, the military just isn't held to the same chemical dumping and water safety standards as other institutions. Or if they are, they've gotten good at finding loopholes. The call is clear. We need to make the military more accountable to the environment.
Thank you very much, Faye. And on that note, we come to our conclusions. So, as you may have noticed, many of the solutions that we hinted at take place within the current paradigm of intense militarization. And yes, these solutions may improve the military's impact on the environment and reduce it substantially. However, we really want to stress here as a team that we believe that as long as the military exists, it will damage the environment. The military is designed to see the natural world as a tool to be exploited and not as a public good to be protected. A case in point in Korea is that they recently introduced environmental legislation in 2017 requiring that all military sites above 33 hectares undergo an environmental assessment. And what they decided to do to get around this, the Defense Department of Korea, is to simply reduce the pockets of land that they sort of take over for military training. So, for example, they purchased a 65-hectare piece of land in 2020, and they cut it up into two smaller parts, which were just less than 33 hectares. So they didn't need to undergo this environmental assessment. So we see that even as we try to improve the framework within which the military operates, they still somehow manage to create loopholes because ultimately they just don't care about the environment.
Yes, and I guess this is also underlined by the underlined by the fact that as long as the country is threatened militarily by another country, and as long as country has a military that it's pumping its funds into, and it's basically it's state capacity that's focusing on. It also means, because it's kind of like a zero-sum game, states don't have infinite resources, that the resources that are focused on the military are not focused on environmental efforts. So that's also another reason why we think that demilitarization is the ultimate solution. Also thinking about that, building up a country after a war, we have multiple wars happening right now, also impedes a country's ability to focus on environmental issues. so demilitarization is the ultimate solution. But I also want to just mention again Faye's analogy from the beginning. Although we've seen a paradigm shift in human rights and we've seen a paradigm shift in human rights, and we basically believe that we can achieve something similar in the military. And I think it's better that we start now than never. Of course, demilitarization will perhaps never be perfect, but we should definitely start making steps in the right direction. And I think that's also why, basically, organizations like PEACEMOMO are that important in order to contribute to this paradigm shift within the society. So yeah, we want to say thank you so much for listening to this rather long presentation, and I hope it was interesting for you. And thank you so much, Gayon, Mignon, PEACEMOMO in general, just for accompanying to us through that project, and for just being like such a lovely partner to work with, and we really enjoyed working with you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yes.
It's amazing to be here. Actually, I've watched the development of the research, and it looks more fascinating and professional as it's finalized. And I'm quite impressed by the solution. The demilitarization is the ultimate solution. I guess by seeing that, I guess 3 of you have a first step into the world of activism already. So I'm so happy that for the sharing, and this is the time for open up the floor. Please ask a question. If you have any question or comments or any reflections regarding the research, and as well as the personal takeaways from the research, please jump in. Or for those of you who are not able to speak up, please use the chat box, and we'll check then, response to that. This is the question, from Zoe Beck. Yeah, she said, will you be submitting to any professional bodies? Are you? Actually, we're planning to upload the research paper to our PEACEMOMO website. I think that before the new year, I promise. And we don't have any specific plans yet. However, it can be, because this is one of our major agenda of PEACEMOMO as well, to debunk the connection between the climate crisis and the military activities so far. So we actually touched this agenda in June of one of our major program, and we are planning to publish one of our the book into our book. So we are also planning to keep continuing submitting and finding some solutions on that as well. So thank you, Naran. This is my friends from Mongolia. She asked for 3 of you, how long did you spend to complete the research? As we heard from several times from you 3 that the data set is not clear and is too broad, and all of the data set is not really publicized by the government. So how long did you take, and plus how difficult was it to collect the data?
So I think we started right after the Chuseok holiday. So I think that was like September. And that was basically like 2 months ago, I think. So we had like a solid 8 weeks of research. And to the question of difficulty, so I think one of the major, challenges we face was definitely language barrier. So we wanted to make it a very Korean focused study, but then the fact that like most of the articles and papers are just written in Korean, despite like good translation tools these days, made it a bit harder for us to find like localized data. So it was definitely one of the like harder research projects I've done so far. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think that more people will be curious about how did you collect the data, but as well as how much it is closed especially regarding the security or military sectors. And yeah, that's why one of our other friends also asked about any difficult like experience or any specific stories about the information. And I think that it is quite covered. And yeah, it's about how much the information is difficult to get. So I think that is quite close, related to the former answer, I think. And if any other people, do you want to add some more?
Yes, actually, yes. Just the question of data accessibility. So maybe like how it looks like. So for one, most of the data we just couldn't find. But then also like the paper, you know, I maybe you remember like the ominous dark clouds on the slide. That was basically the paper was published, but it was just grayed out in the paper. So the percentages were grayed out in the paper. So like it looked like a paper that was like internally used and publicized, but like the actual data is there, but like they just don't want to release it. So that kind of like hints at like definitely like security views. So that's maybe to speak to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. We have two hands more. First Anna and then Benjamin, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm one of the Minerva staff, and I actually attended their session last weekend when we presented all the students' project outcome. But I happened to listen to their presentation and wanted to learn more. So actually, I came here to hear the extended version of presentation, which I'm also quite impressed. And for three of you guys, I'm very proud. And also, I didn't get to give you compliments. I only get to ask question last time because of the short time amount. But I really, really do see that how meaningful and important this work is, and how deep you guys went into create this research outcomes. So I wanted to make sure that I deliver this compliments to you all. And the one of the question I had last time, I was really curious because I know from the previous experience, Minerva students, whenever they attend this kind of civic projects with local experts, they gain different insights and learnings. And this may like further their interest in doing more research in a certain area, or like go into some job searching opportunities. So I'm really curious how this actually help you guys lead to certain direction of your future goal and plans.
That was one of my prepared question. How would you link this experience to your future work? Could you respond to that, and then we'll come back to Benjamin.
Yeah, I think I can probably speak to this one first. So I think the biggest professional takeaway for me from this was, I think before I had always really seen different areas of activism, different areas of change as quite separate from one another. You know, this idea that you have people who work on the environment, and you have people who work on peace, and you have people who work on global development, or whatever it may be, and all of those people are separate professionals in separate fields. And I think a lot of the information that we get as students is this idea that it's our job to find the thing that we're the most well suited for, or the thing we care the most about, or the thing that's the most impactful. And this idea that, you know, the ultimate cause that we need to work on in our lives or in our research will one day mystically arise out of the ashes if we spend long enough wondering about it. You know, at some point, maybe in the fourth year, just before we graduate, it'll just appear. It'll be an epiphany, and then we'll know which of these cause areas, and we have to pick one. And I think what this research really showed me is that that's absolutely not the case. There is so much intersectionality between sustainability and the military, between the military and economics, between sustainability and economics, between all of these things and politics. You know, we didn't get to talk in the report today about how politicized all of this can be in different countries. And so I think what this really, for my professional goals, although I don't know necessarily whether I'll be pursuing sustainability or or peace or military relations any further, yet. You know, I think it's early days for me in that way. What this really has instilled me with is the sense that everything is so deeply connected, and that there's no such thing as this one issue that will magically arise and be the perfect thing to work on for the rest of your life. That you have to dig into, you know, the messy intricacies between them.
And if I can just quickly jump in there, I just wanted to say thank you so much to PEACEMOMO for just being willing to raise those awkward questions that we at the beginning, I think, were just too scared to ask. So when it comes to greenwashing, I think we as a team would have preferred to conveniently ignore that. And we would have loved if at the end we could have said, you know, all the solutions we presented, lead-free bullets, you know, green tanks, etc. That's going to solve everything. And, you know, we'll live all in a great, you know, environment after that. And I think Gayan did a great job of constantly reminding us as to what the military's ultimate purpose was and how really the ultimate solution is demilitarization. So I think just the dedication that PEACEMOMO has to the like ultimate cause is has really been inspiring to me. So yes, thank you, Gayan.
Thank you. So yeah, please, Benjamin, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to just, firstly, I want to say it was a really interesting presentation. I think it was really well done. I think it was quite intuitive, a lot of the points that were brought up. And certainly it kind of makes you reflect a little bit on certain things that you maybe take as being conventional within academic circles. So I thought that was really good. So well done. Well done for doing that. I guess I wanted to just bring up maybe, it may seem slightly tangential, but I'd like your perspectives anyway. In the use of militaries to specifically help in disaster response. So most particularly, it's been used in hurricanes, especially in the Gulf of Mexico. The US Marines and Army have gotten directly involved in this regard, and especially after the tsunami within the Indian Ocean, the military, well, various different militaries got extremely involved in cleanup efforts and in rebuilding. And I think there could, I mean, what do you guys think about that? Is this something that you would deem to be almost greenwashing the reputation of the military and saying, well, we have to have these things, look at all the good things we do, we help provide security, we help disaster response, so we can't possibly change these kind of different techniques. If they're going to cost us more, it means we can't help in this disaster response. What are your kind of perspectives on that?
Okay, the question was like, how do you think of the use of military itself to health and disaster response? Is it for the raise their reputation, or was it greenwashing, or was it can be another role of military itself? How would you respond?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say there. The one thing maybe to start with is in the paper, which we didn't discuss today at all, we go on a little bit about an example of exactly this, right, where the Indian military has actually been co-opted to clean up oil spills for a number of years. This has been part of their operations, and they work along with the Coast Guard as well as civilian volunteers. And I think that in some ways it can be argued that this is you know, a beneficial repurposing of existing military personnel and equipment that can sometimes be for the benefit of the environment. And this can be, you know, a positive instance of where the interests of the military just so happen to align with the interests of civilians and also of the environment. And so I think in a vacuum, we can view these incidents that way. And, you know, we don't necessarily have to object to them in all instances. But I think for sure there is the difficulty with you know, whether the military uses this as reputation builders. I probably don't know enough to speak to this more specifically, but my intuition is that the military perhaps doesn't really need to rely on these kind of things. You know, they're not very accountable to the public. They don't really need to care what the public thinks about them in a lot of societies. They have the monopoly on force. They have a lot of funding from government. And civilian activism, as we've talked about, doesn't tend to, you know, I mean, of course, there's landmark case studies where this isn't true, things like the Vietnam War. But my intuition, anyway, is that maybe the military isn't too concerned with their reputation in the eyes of civilians, and is, you know, more concerned with sort of scapegoating various environmental regulations. And I think if we are in that paradigm, maybe it's beneficial if every now and then we're able to co-opt that power for the good. But I don't know if you guys have anything to add, or if Benjamin, there's something that evokes in you as a response.
Well, I know this is your presentation. I'll just very briefly say I don't necessarily agree with all of that, but I think it raises interesting issues. And I'll let the call continue with other people. But thank you for responding to that. That was an interesting response.
Regarding the question, probably Francis one time talked about the new role of the military troops as a like disaster rescue team, because it can be an easier way to being on a team for our daily life security rather than the security to protect the security of our whole people. This is more closely connected to keep the security of the daily life. So it can be used another role of the military, I guess. And we have another a question up there from Naran. It couldn't be a long answer, but please, is there any damage to human, animals, or land because of the landmine in Korea? So it's really not easy to answer. However, if you have any ideas of it, could you respond to it as well? Or we can pull over to other resources as well. Reading resources we can, jump into.
Yes, I mean, that's a wonderful question. Honestly, I am not aware of any resources on landmines in South Korea. I imagine, Gayon, you are more knowledgeable when it comes to that. Personally, no. I would imagine that they perhaps contain heavy metals and therefore, beyond the risk of them exploding and causing like direct damage, they're also perhaps leaching environmental toxins if they're not recovered over multiple decades. But I'm not aware. I imagine the demilitarized zone contains quite a few landmines.
Yeah, that is
Yeah, maybe I
definitely
can.
true.
Oh.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, maybe I can add on to that, and that the three of us actually were recently that lucky to also get to see the demilitarized zone, I think. Yeah. They're like what we learned is that it's like still full of landmines, and I can imagine that quite a few animals may be heavy enough to actually trigger them, and are probably killed by them each year. So although I'm also not aware of any data that quantifies those numbers, I'm certain that there are incidents.
Yeah, it is definitely true that there is a huge accidents from time to time that the landmine is covered under the ground, it is exploded by accident, and some people or animals are hurt by the landmine, and also I guess that it goes through underground probably, and it definitely hurt a lot more. So because of the time wise, we're running out of the time. So if it's possible, one or two more questions or comments, for today.
Can I?
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. It was just amazing. I really learned a lot, and thank you very much for your research and your work with PEACEMOMO. And I have just a couple of small questions. One is, well, it's not really a question, maybe a request, but would you be willing to share this PowerPoint with us? Or I don't want to give you pressure, but if you can, that'd be wonderful. The first three questions was really a really great opening, and I wanted to get them and use them in the future. So thank you very much. And also, you mentioned how the U.S. U.S. military treated Korean land. So I was wondering, if you're aware of other cases in other countries in the world, where the U.S. Army, U.S. military is located. For example, in Germany, how do they treat those lands? Is it just particularly Korea that they treat brutally, or or is that just a common case? That was a question. And another question I have is, how large is this this discourse, the military and climate change discourse? How large is it in the climate change discourse scene? So those two questions.
Thank you, Dongcha. The first question about the how the military, U.S. military, particularly in other world, is treated. Was it brutally treated only in the South Korea or not, or do you have any other cases? Yeah, I think that you can respond to the question first and the other question later on.
Sure. So in a brief response to the question about other military bases, this wasn't our focus, so I would hesitate to say something too generalizable, but we did certainly find other case studies from around the world where the US military in particular had mistreated land other than their own. One example that comes to mind was large levels of water contamination due to a military base in Puerto Rico. And I think it was Puerto Rico, or perhaps, yes, was. Just fact-checking, sanity checking. So I believe that was one other case study we found. That's the only one that I'm aware of that came up in our research, although I wouldn't be surprised to know that there were many others.
And just to build on that, like the levels of water contamination in that area were so severe that like there were huge increases in birth, like I think what is it called again, like fetal maldevelopments, like sort of issues when it came to pregnancies that were so severe that as soon as the US left, within a year I think they saw positive increases in regards to decreased fetal mortality and so on. It was pretty shocking. And obviously within the States as well, they're not doing a very good job of managing their own land. I think there were multiple cases of military bases that have been left vacant, but they still haven't been cleaned of the environmental pollution and they've just been sitting empty for decades.
Yeah, I guess I quickly did some quick googling just also because this wasn't our focus, and yeah, like basically I just found an article by the Institute of Policy Studies that says that the cleanup of all US coast, soil and groundwater pollution overseas could cost more than $3 billion. And especially in Germany, industrial solvents, firefighting foams, and waste have destroyed local ecosystems near some military bases. And actually, where I'm from in Germany, I'm living quite close to a military base. It's only like 50 kilometers away. And so like I know it's like quite a secluded area still. So I can imagine that like perhaps cleanup's still going on. So yeah, maybe you speak to that.
Okay, thank you. And I guess yeah, we'll have the Zhongzhou second question as the last question. Is it okay? Yeah, if it's possible to be answered, however, do you know how large is the discourse on the climate crisis or military between that? I guess in Korea it is definitely very small and very new. That's why PEACEMOMO is keep working on that. And how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I can go first then. So I guess we also found that the discourse in other countries and like overall worldwide is really small. So I showed one of the posters that was made for the COP that's currently going on, and as far as I know, military missions were not included in the global stocktake, although that's something I'll have to confirm. Also, I feel like the global stocktake are probably not published yet because they're like currently used at COP28. Yeah, but it's definitely a small discourse that's going on, and only a few NGOs are currently focusing on it. I think in Germany, Greenpeace, for example, I mean, it's kind of in the name, Greenpeace, already makes a link between the military and the climate. Yeah, but it's definitely like an issue. Like for example, like also I myself wasn't aware before, and I would say I've read quite a lot into like yeah, I guess like climate activism, at least in Germany. So it's really it felt like a bit like the cutting edge, also like the lack of resources on the topic. So I guess that's another indicator. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I asked that second question just because I thought the findings you have shared was just so striking, and I wanted the world hear this more. So I wanted to know, how big this discussion is. So if it's not, then, well, we find the works to do. So, so that's the
Yay.
thing. And also the reason why I asked the first question, how the U.S. base treated the land that they were stationed, was I realized that I wanted to know, how the U.S. Treat differently, especially the countries between, like Germany, the developed country, and also the country in Europe, and other countries in other parts of the world. The places used to be known as the third world or the underdeveloped countries. Korea was one of them. So if you can do research further on that might be a good topic too, maybe. And that just came to me too. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, for those of you who are really curious about this topic, you can click on, later on PEACEMOMO's material, reading material. Well, that will be come up to the website and will be out as a book as well. And I think that, this is almost the time to wrapping up. So before wrapping up, I will ask three of you a simple one last comments or reflections on this session or so far the research papers as well.
I guess I don't know, just like I was just like such an amazing experience to be working with you. And maybe also, I don't know, like there's maybe something Anna can speak to too, but like Minerva's gonna continue to be operating and so I feel like also like for I guess future generations of students, I feel like I think there might be still lots of opportunities out there. It's just like, I don't know, it's amazing to like not only be able to go and like study in a country, but also like work with a local organization and get to know you like as amazing people. And I think what I feel right now is just like being like so grateful for this opportunity to get like such a big insight into like just Korea as a country, and like really enjoying my time here also thanks to this project.
I just wanted to say that when I will be, years later, when I'll think back to PEACEMOMO, I'll think of the story of David and Goliath. And I think PEACEMOMO is just really filling the boots of David here. Like the work you guys are doing with such a small team is amazing. And now that we've been observing the work in other countries and seeing how with militaries who are slightly more open to change, like in Sweden, change is happening, I think it's only a matter of time till the South Korean military starts taking your demands much more seriously. So yes, I will be really just looking forward to hearing what's happening in South Korea. I'll be keeping track of PEACEMOMO's developments. Thank you, Gayan.
Thank you so much. So would you like to add on or continue, Faye, or is it good to just
I
go?
apologize. My thought just completely vacated my head when you called them. That was most embarrassing. I think it's all been said. It's been a truly incredible project. We've learned so much. And just to thank everybody for coming in and listening to us. Of course, we're by no means experts or professionals in this field, so it really just means so much to us that you've supported our learning by being here, and we're so grateful for this chance.
Okay, so I think it's good to go. We'd like to thank you all for sharing today and sharing your time to be here. We'd like to keep contacting on, and thank you so much for you three as well. A special thanks to Jules, Ellie, and Faye for your insights and experience with us. So thank you so much and keep in touch.